Hey guys, welcome back. I hope you're having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first story is titled, Am I the A-hole for ruining my wife and MIL's and family's relationship because mother-in-law was being overly flirty towards me? So, this story starts a little over a year ago when my FIL, 70, was diagnosed with cancer. By the time they found it, it had metastasized into neighboring organs and eventually into his spine. During the time when it was first discovered, mother-in-law, 58, was under extreme mental duress and would show up at our house, sometimes in the middle of the night, crying. My wife, 30 at the time, was very pregnant, and so, with her permission, I, 29, would console mother-in-law, hug, assure everything was going to be fine, etc. We went on a vacation as an entire family, and what we thought was going to be a kind of quiet experience was more of a celebratory one. The treatment was working. The cancer had stopped progressing and he was in better shape than he should have been. On this vacation, however, my wife and I had a little extra time one morning, and so we lounged out on the balcony of the suite we all had stayed in. To be perfectly frank, I had morning wood and was wearing tight shorts, so you can get the picture. Mother-in-law came out onto the balcony as we were stirring, and I caught her staring at my crotch. We made eye contact and she looked away, and I greeted her quickly to make it not awkward. The moment passed and everything seemed okay. Except ever since then, she makes a point of lingering in hugs and brushing her breasts against me when she asks to hold our child, which is every time I'm in the room with them. So I try to make a point of not being in the room with her when I'm with my child, or coming up with an excuse to not pass them off. So it all came to a head this past Thanksgiving when we met at their house. There was a moment when I was walking towards the kitchen and she came down the hallway towards me. The hallway is tight at their house and she slowly moved past me with her rear poked out into my crotch. That was the last straw. I debated up until that point on telling my wife because everything until then felt as though it could be hearsay and mother-in-law would just say it was all in my head. So the following week I sat my wife down and told her everything that had happened from until Thanksgiving. And she was furious. She agreed with me, though, that it could all just be a misunderstanding, and wanted to see how mother-in-law interacted with me in the next couple of weeks to see for herself if anything was off. She watched, and I could see in her eyes how much she was stewing inside when we brought our child over to their house, and her mom immediately went to take them out of my arms and pressed herself against me in the process. I made eye contact with my wife, and she blew up. Long story short, the family is pissed at me for starting it all and are calling me the a-hole because the family has finally gotten to a place of being at peace, and FIL was doing better, etc., etc. I didn't think of it really in those terms, just how uncomfortable I felt with the situation, and maybe I am. But I thought I'd post here and see what you all thought. So, am I the a-hole? Comment said, not the a-hole. This sounds like so many sexual harassment stories I've heard through the years. I'm so sorry this happened. I'm glad your wife backed you up and that you felt safe enough to go to her with your concerns. That can't have been easy. Your mother-in-law is the only one who owes apologies. Yes, she may be embarrassed and maybe she didn't mean it, but ultimately it's your feelings that matter here. She needs to give a real apology and ensure she doesn't make you uncomfortable again. Until you're completely sure you're not going to be put in that situation again, you may need to limit contact, which is your right, and frankly, any objections from your harasser is just more harassment. Another comment said, your mother-in-law was sexually harassing you. You were completely in the right to tell your wife, and good for her for having your back and standing up to her mom. Duck anyone who tells you any different. Not the a-hole. The next story is titled, Am I the a-hole for not letting mother-in-law move in with me when she begins her divorce? My wife and I just got married a couple months ago. We live in a house that solely belongs to me, purchased before marriage. My mother-in-law has been contemplating divorce from my wife's stepdad for years and thinks she's finally going to start the process within a couple months. She asked us if she could live with us for a few months while she begins her new life. We said no. Are we the a-holes? Her reaction was pretty bad, and we felt awful. In the end, we told her if it was between her living on the street and living with us, of course we'd help her out. But we feel there's a lot of other ways she can go about this, and our home should be a last resort. We explained that we've just begun our lives as a married couple, and we need to put our relationship first. It's also a small house, and I don't see it being practical to have her living with us. Mother-in-law and I both work from home, and I think it would be a huge disruption to our lives because of that alone, among other things like intimacy with my wife, feeling comfortable in my own home, etc. What do y'all think? Comment said, not the a-hole. You and your wife are doing a great job maintaining boundaries with MIL. It's not your responsibility to house her. Like you said, if she literally had nowhere else to go, that's a different story, but I'm sure there are other options for her. Another comment said, not the a-hole. It's pretty convenient timing that your mother-in-law wants to leave her husband almost immediately after her daughter gets married and moved into a house. It's entirely possible that MIL's long-term plan includes living for free with you and your wife and using any divorce settlement for her personal spending. It would be a bad idea to allow mother-in-law to become your dependent. Instead, offer to help mother-in-law find a living situation that's within her budget. If she isn't currently working, she might also benefit from help finding work. If she truly wants help to care for herself, then this kind of help may benefit MIL. If she responds badly to polite offers for help of this type, then that's a sign that she just wants someone to take care of her. But you and your wife need time and space to yourselves. You don't owe it to anyone to house them for any length of time. The next story is titled, Am I the a-hole for getting my stepsister and her family banned from Christmas? I have a daughter, Elena, 6, and my stepsister Jess has a daughter, Hattie, 5. Me, my husband, Jess, and her husband, Paul, are all staying at our parents' house over the Xmas period. For context, Paul arrived a day after the rest of us, very late at night because he does shift work and worked late before driving to our parents'. The next morning, the girls were playing in Elena's room at about 10 a.m. The adults were all downstairs, except Paul because he was sleeping and my stepdad was out. Suddenly, we heard Paul shouting. This isn't too unusual, if unpleasant, but this episode sounded particularly bad, so we got up. Before we can even get to the stairs, my daughter runs down crying, saying Paul had shouted at her for waking him up. My husband was livid and went upstairs to deal with Paul while I calmed my daughter down. I knew it would be absolutely impossible for us to be around Paul after what happened, so we would probably be leaving. Jess said that was ridiculous. Paul probably got annoyed and was tired and he'd apologize, and everything would be fine. I said, no, it would not be fine. Nobody shouts at my child and remains on speaking terms with me or around my daughter. Paul should know better than to be acting like that with other people's children. When my stepdad came back, we told him what happened and that we would be leaving because we refused to subject Elena to being around Paul after what he did. And we don't trust him not to overstep his boundaries like that again. My stepdad agreed, but said that it was unfair that we should have to leave after Paul was the problem. He called Paul and Jess down and said they had to go, weren't welcome on Christmas, or until after we had gone home. Paul tried to defend himself, saying the kids should have been quieter, but when my husband got annoyed, Paul half-heartedly apologized. I didn't believe a word of his apology. My stepdad reiterated that Jess was welcome to stay without Paul, but Paul had to be gone within the hour. She started an expletive rant, so I left the room with Elena, and the next I saw was her and Paul going upstairs to pack. They left without a goodbye. Since they've been gone, every few hours I've got a text from Jess saying how I've ruined her Christmas and her relationship with her dad over 30 seconds of bad judgment. I don't think I created this situation because it was my stepdad's decision to throw them out. I offered to leave. I also think Paul made this bed that Jess is lying in. All he had to do was come downstairs and ask us to quiet the children or pop his head into the room and ask politely. Nevertheless, I do feel bad that Jess is stuck in the middle and that Hattie won't see her grandparents on Christmas because of this. Did I overreact? Would Paul apologizing have been enough? Comment said, a 5-year-old and a 6-year-old are going to make noise playing together. It was 10 a.m., not 1 a.m., so I fail to see why anyone should have gotten angry about it. I'm stuck on the part where you say Paul shouting is unpleasant but not unusual. That's an issue. If your BIL is shouting at his kid enough for it to be a normal thing, there's something wrong there. She's 5. Her dad shouting at her shouldn't be the norm. Good for you for standing up for your kid and your family. Paul has absolutely no business shouting at your daughter for playing. She's 6. Honestly, I'd say that short of causing bodily harm to his daughter, he should never be yelling at someone else's kid. You didn't demand they get kicked out. You told your family that as a result of your BIL's inappropriate behavior, you would leave so your daughter wasn't subjected to it anymore. Your stepdad obviously agrees that Paul was out of line. Otherwise, he wouldn't have asked you to stay and Paul to leave. I have a feeling this shouting thing happens often. Otherwise, I don't see why your stepdad would have asked Paul to leave. Another comment said, not the a-hole. Shouting at kids is abusive and not okay. You are not responsible for how your stepdad handled it. No one ruined anyone's Christmas. Even the Grinch learned that other people's Christmas experiences were not his to control. In future, it might help to ensure that Paul and Jess understand what kind of behaviors are acceptable and not acceptable, and to give them a chance if they genuinely seem to understand and commit to acceptable behavior. Sorry to hear you and your family had an unhealthy surprise, disappointment, guilt, and confusion at your get-together. The last story is titled, Entitled Idiot is Upset Because My Husband is Married. When my now adult daughter was almost 3, we had a regular monthly family dinner plan. We would go to a used bookstore that was near a Mexican place we liked and a McDonald's which our kids liked. The Mexican restaurant would let us sit on the porch and bring Happy Meals there for the kids. One night, our son, older than our daughter, was at a sleepover, so we were a party of 3. After eating, we went to the used bookstore. We had a stroller with us so that our daughter could sit in it if she got too tired. She was an easy kid who would just climb into the little stroller and chill or snooze if we were not done browsing. I was looking at cookbooks while my husband was in the kids section with our daughter. I noticed some redhead chick talking to my husband. I went back to the books for a couple of minutes, and when I look up, the woman is still talking, but more talking at him than to him. He was starting to look very uncomfortable. I can tell she's hitting on him by the way he held up his hand and pointed to his wedding ring. Being me, I let this play out for a few minutes, mostly to laugh about with him later. As I watch, my daughter goes to him and wraps her arm around him. She gives this woman the nastiest look I had ever seen on her face. I start walking over because I can tell that my daughter is about to say something to this woman that I will either laugh at or need to intervene because of. As I get almost to them, my daughter tells the woman that her daddy already has a mommy for her, and if she doesn't get away from him, she's going to puke on her. My daughter has always had the ability to vomit at will. She had already weaponized it against one of my male relatives with a weak stomach. The woman, not knowing I was behind her, told my daughter that her daddy didn't have a mommy to go with him, and daddies needed mommies. My daughter looked at me with a look that clearly stated, she is an idiot. Get her away from me now. I walk past the woman and up to my husband. I put my arm around him and lean into him. Then I put the hand wearing my wedding ring up on his chest as I look at her. The redhead doesn't have the sense to just leave the area. She had to start a rant about how I should have been right by him if I wanted to keep him. How he should go with her and divorce me because she would never be away from him. And how I didn't deserve a man and she does, so she's just going to replace me and raise my kids as her own. I looked up at my husband and asked how he kept getting the weirdos that have elevators that don't go all the way up to want to replace me. Red-headed chick loses it and starts saying she wants to fight me over him, that whichever one of us wins will get to keep him. I asked her if she seriously thought that I would bother with a fight. He was already mine, and I don't believe in fights. I just shoot to kill. Then this lunatic starts screaming that I'm trying to kill her. At that point, my daughter had enough. She walked over to the lady and waited until the stupid woman bent down to talk to her. Then my daughter puked all over her, and sort of up onto her neck so that when she stood up, lots of it ran down her shirt. Staff was already on the way over and wanted to know why the lady was screaming. I told them she was hitting on my husband and then wanted to fight me for him. I didn't know why she suddenly started saying that I wanted to kill her, to shoot her. I didn't even own a gun. She was just being an idiot, and then she got my daughter all upset, so my daughter puked. I cleaned our daughter up and had her rinse out her mouth. On the way home, my husband insisted we stop and buy her some ice cream. When I asked my daughter why she thought she needed to puke on the lady, my daughter told me that we had already wasted enough time talking and it clearly wasn't going anywhere, so she ended it. My daughter has always had a way of cutting through the garbage in life. Thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. We'll